not wearing a tie.
So, clicker's on.
Clicker's on? Okay, good.
And there's your next slide.
Okay,
So,
wonderful.
you're just ready to go.
Clicker's right there. I got the laser pointer. Okay. Fantastic. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It's nice to see a familiar face. And this is probably my third time back here at Bonita Bay. This is actually my favorite community for a number of reasons. Probably the top reason is the fact that I believe that Bonita Bay sets the bar for the other communities to follow, especially over this past 1 year where we've been dealing with the pandemic. So again, adhering to social distancing, I'm going to remove my mask, and I miss doing this. So today I want to talk to you about a special topic. This is actually my favorite. My favorite topic is neuroplasticity, and it has really been a main interest of mine for a number of years already. And actually, at one point, it became I would say, a life and death issue for me, where I became my own patient. And I put into effect the very principles that I had so eagerly and passionately learned about. So, and if we have time at the end, I'll tell you my story. Okay? But let me tell you a little bit about me. Again, my name is Dr. Joseph Bandera. I'm internal medicine and geriatric medicine dual board certified. I'm a concierge physician. My office is in North Naples. I've opened up that practice about 1.5 years ago. Prior to that, I served as the former medical director for geriatrics at NCH Hospital. I had an outpatient practice and an inpatient service line where I serviced both hospitals, NCH Baker and NCH North. But I saw the need for the type of medicine that only concierge medicine can provide, especially to our aging population. And that's how I opened up my practice. Never looked back, and I'm a happier individual, and I feel that I am the physician that I always wanted to be. I'm the physician that I went to med school for. I'm the physician that since I was 4 years old I wanted to be. So in addition to internal medicine and geriatrics, I'm a researcher. I do research primarily into Alzheimer's and therapeutic, God willing, potentially therapeutic modalities for the treatment of such a devastating disease. Neuroplasticity, to me, it's a revelation. It really is something relatively new. Back in 2006, Harvard University performed a paradigm shift, a study, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But based on that study, the idea of neuroplasticity came about, this time with evidence to back it. So let's go ahead and start. So remember when you were a kid and the first time you ever saw an image or a structure of the human brain, and we all gathered around that table and everybody's with their oohs and ahs. Maybe oh, that's gross. Okay. But that was our first exposure. And hopefully, at some point as we developed, we had a good teacher or a good professor that showed us what a real human brain looks like. And the adult human brain, it weighs on average about 3 pounds, okay? And within those 3 pounds, we have about 86 billion neurons. So 86 billion neurons within this small structure that weighs about 3.5 pounds. As technology has progressed, we've really been able to visualize the brain in ways that could never be imagined before, and I'll show you that next. But the human brain, we know that it runs on electricity, right? We are electric beings. We have a central and a peripheral nervous system. So we really are electric beings. And for us to carry electricity, we need wires, right? So those wires are exactly what the central and peripheral nervous systems are. And I'll prove it to you. So the Harvard study that I made reference to about a minute or so ago in 2006, here's what they did. There were two groups they took one large group of people, they split them in two. And they told everybody, we're going to teach you a 5-fingered piano sequence. You will practice that sequence for 2 hours a day for the next 4 days. We're going to image your brains before and after the study. Not just any imaging, but these were functional MRIs. Now, what's the difference between your standard MRI and a functional MRI? Well, the beauty of the functional MRI is that it lights up, literally, exactly in the area of the brain that you are stimulating. So we get a direct correlation between a movement and what part of the brain handles that. And emotion, what part of the brain handles that. Listening to music, what part of the brain is stimulated. And it's all very specific, so we can actually begin to slowly map out the brain. So back to our study. You're all going to practice for 2 hours a day, 4 days a week, a 5-fingered piano sequence. And we're going to split this group up in two. Now, here's the thing. You guys get a real piano keyboard to play on, practice with. You guys, you don't get a piano. You're simply going to rest your hand on the table, but you are going to imagine that you're playing those keys, that 5-fingered sequence, for 2 hours, 4 days a week. So, imaging before, imaging afterwards. At the end of 4 days, this crowd, who had the real piano to play with, what do you think their functional MRI showed? A lot of activity, exactly. A lot of activity. And not only a lot of activity in a specific area of the brain, not only a lot of activity in a specific area of the brain, but we saw that the individuals on this side, that area of the brain that was lit up was actually recruiting neuronal activity from around it. That neuronal activity is what restructures and rewires that area of the brain. How can this happen, you ask? Well, I'll tell you why, because we're all wiring. So if one area gets stimulated, the other areas around it start to pull activity to fortify itself. Now, let's go back. What do you think they found with this group? Now, this group is the one that did not have a piano keyboard. They put their hands on the table, but for those 2 hours, they imagined playing it. What do you think their functional MRIs showed?
Lack of activity because they had no stimulation.
No. The opposite of that.
The opposite?
It was busy. It
Really?
lit up. It lit up.
I'm trying to think.
Right. So here's where that paradigm shift comes in, because we would have thought that, nah, it's not. But it does.
Thinking I'd be bored stiff.
So that area of the brain lit up. And guess what? Remember that recruitment of neuronal activity that we saw in this group? We saw the same recruitment of neuronal activity to the individuals who had their hand on the table. Now, what does that show you? It shows you, number one, that different areas of our brain control different elements of our movements, right? Or of our actions. But not only did it show that, it showed that whether you're actually playing a keyboard or whether you're just imagining the process, the brain doesn't know the difference. Pretty cool, right? Yes, sir.
Was it consistent with every person? Like, if you were playing the piano, all those would be the same, or?
Yes, it was consistent with every, that's an excellent question. It was consistent with every person because those fine motor movements controlled by the cortex were in the same area of the brain. Now, the only thing in the study, they didn't use right and left-handed people. They didn't differentiate those, right? Because people that are left-handed are right side brain dominant. So those are the only two groups. They didn't differentiate them. But apart from that, the same area of the brain was stimulated.
Did they use just one hand?
One-handed piano sequence. Yeah. Now here's the rub. Do you think that an individual who put their hand on the table and thought to themselves, I wonder what's for dinner tonight? This is pretty boring. Do you think that they would have lit up their functional MRIs? Mm-mm. Do you think they would have recruited neuronal activity to that area of the brain? No. So what's the difference? The difference is intentionality. In other words, focusing on exactly what you're going to do. It's kind of like, let's say you want to work out, you want to develop your biceps muscles. You go to the gym and you don't do crunches, right? You don't do crunches, you don't do deadlifts. You do curls because you want to focus on that muscle. And actually, if you focus on that muscle, you're going to get better results. Intentionality. And that word's going to come up a little down the road when I show you that you can actually take your brain to the gym. And you can select what part of the brain you want to focus on. I'll prove it. So here's the brain. Remember I told you that we can see the brains in new ways that we never could before. Look, here's our traditional structural MRI that we get when we go to the hospital. Here's the functional MRI. Remember I mentioned that it lights up? It really does light up. And then this is my favorite. This is a diffusion MRI. This is the newest modality, and to me, the most fascinating. Why? Well, because remember I told you that we're all just wires? We really are. Check this out. So now, do you understand why if we're stimulating this area of the brain while we're learning that five-handed piano sequence, neuronal activity can be recruited from the areas around it. Why? Because we're all wires up there. Neuroplasticity. We are not static. We are plastic. We are malleable. Our brains are malleable. I'll show you some more pictures that I've collected. This is the individual facing that way. And I'll show you the brain stem, the cerebellum. And here comes my favorite. Take this image and have the individual face forward. Take the image and add colors to it, and that's what you get. So we really are just wires. Yes, sir?
How much does that vary from individual to individual?
Highly variable.
So my wife could play the piano far better than I. Her image is going to look different than mine.
The circuitry within that image, probably, yes.
different than his?
The wiring is variable between individuals. I don't think the array of wires is as important as how they are interconnected with one another. Which areas of the brain are more fortified than the other. For instance, I'll give you an example. Your landscaper, he spends most of his days planning his routes. As he's going around the neighborhood and he's going around bushes, he looks at a yard and he's going to do diagonal lines on that yard, and he does the periphery. So that visual spatial processing ability that he has is probably more refined than your visual spatial abilities in that regard, right? So it's highly variable depending on the stimulus we give our brains. Does that make sense? Yeah? Thank you for asking questions. I love an audience that asks a question. I love to be interactive, so feel free, okay? So we're all just wires up there, right? And we're actually highways. Each one of these wires form a highway, right? Straight through the jungle. This highway can carry everything from let's call it a scooter, to a bicycle, to a taxi, to a cargo truck. It's a firm, well-established road, cuts straight through the jungle. Now, what would happen if suddenly, in this same area, there's a large earthquake, and suddenly this road becomes that, right? The road is damaged. Neuronal connections have been, bless you, have been cut or damaged. So I liken this unto an individual that has a stroke. They have a stroke and, suddenly they're having coffee and they start slurring their speech, and they can't move their arm. They're rushed to the hospital, and about a day later, you go to visit them, and they've lost function in the left side of their body. They have left-sided hemiparesis. As soon as that, we'll call them a patient, is stable in the hospital, where do they get transferred to? Yes. And hopefully, intensive physical therapy in an inpatient rehab, where they have to they have to be able to tolerate a set number of hours every day while they are in rehab. Why do we do that? Why is there such a rush to get them there? It's not because the insurance won't cover it. I'm sure there's some contribution, to be honest with you, but no, it's because these individuals need to start creating bypasses. They need to start with this. They just had a stroke. It knocked out those tracks in the brain, and we start having them engage in physical therapy, using that left leg, using the left arm, speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy. Hopefully a good speech therapist who has a forte in cognitive rehab. But the goal is get you moving. Why? Because your brain is able to form synapses around that damaged area. The damaged area, what's done is done. That road, nobody's going to repave that. Our brains don't work that way. We create areas around that. We bypass those damaged areas, and there is a golden window of about 6 months after a stroke that individual's going to recover the most of. They can still do it after 6 months, but that rate, that initial progress, it's slowed down. Okay. Now, how is this possible? It's possible through neuroplasticity. Yes.
Well, you talk about physical control the physical activity. How about more, for lack of a better word, mental activity like memory?
Yes.
A person suffers a stroke and loses memory. Are there exercises or therapies that would allow that person to recover the memory?
Yes. Undoubtedly, yes. And we'll go into that. We have this pathway, day in and day out, practicing at the piano those 2 hours a day, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. It's not that road that we saw in the beginning that crumpled with the earthquake, but it's a pathway, right? It's a pathway that we can use, right? So let's go back to our brains when we first came into this world, right? I'll use the example of this is my son Aiden. He was about 1.5 now. He's almost 4.5 now, and you know I since he was born, I would watch him and I would think, my God, what must it feel like to be him? I mean, how does he process that vast amount of stimulus, right? I'm sorry, let me mute this. Because the truth is, our brains, they develop at an unprecedented rate. And all through childhood and adolescence, this is him now a little older. Now, I'll tell you one thing that I noticed about Aiden is that when he sleeps, have you ever watched a child when they sleep? They are frequently in rapid eye movement. Have you seen that? It's like they're dreaming all the time. So we alternate. We have cycles of sleep, and we go in and out of REM and non-REM sleep, both of which are actually very important. But we know that those neuronal connections are established during REM sleep. And kids, if you watch a young child or a baby sleep, their eyes are moving right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, and you can see it from underneath their lids. So, but the misconception is that, look, we are born into this world through our childhood. Our brains are developing at an unprecedented rate, but suddenly we hit a point in our lives where it stops. It comes to a screeching halt, right? So this brings me to the first misconception. And thanks to neuroplasticity, we can see that certain beliefs that we had before have thankfully been proven wrong. So here's the first misconception. That again, our brains develop at an unprecedented rate. It hits a point where it just stops, right? And after that, we believe that the brain really didn't or couldn't change, and that cells die off. And as cells die off, cognitive impairments set in. And as those cognitive impairments begin to affect and impact our functionality and decrease our functionality, then eventually dementia sets in, regardless of which type. Well, I'm going to show you that, no, it's not true. Actually, our brains never stop developing. Our brains never stop rewiring and restructuring themselves. Actually, when here's another misconception. When you're not thinking about anything, you believe that your brain is at rest, and it's not. It's highly, highly active. Even when you're sleeping, it's highly active. And we used to think that we only use certain parts of our brain at any given time. No, the brain as a supercomputer is always active. Just certain parts are more active than others, depending on the stimulus. So this is an example. I love this image. It's our brain when we're not thinking about anything. Okay, so look. Remember this picture? The truth is, look, every time you learn a new skill or information or behavior, you change your brain. You change it. it's malleable, it's plastic. The key to this is neuroplasticity. Now, look, how do we learn? And why do some people learn faster than others? Why are some people more, they just pick up things easier, right? I'll give you an example. Me, I am terrible at math. You want to know what subject I formally stink at? Math. Yet I'm good with sciences. So it's a natural propensity. Certain things come easier than others. How old was Beethoven when he wrote his first symphony? It's, yes, yes. So prodigies. We have yet to explain prodigies, right? But we know that an individual who stimulates a certain area of the brain, and I'll show you examples of this, depending on which part of the brain is more stimulated, the volume of the brain increases. The network, the connections fortify themselves. There's more volume in that area of the brain. I'll show you. Yes?
This picture, is this the brain at rest or the brain stimulated?
This is a brain at rest, supposedly at rest, right? Now, this is not the functional MRI, though. The functional MRI is where it lights up, all right? This is not the functional MRI. The functional MRI tells us where the activities is. This type of MRI shows us the actual tracks. Okay, so how do we learn? 3 steps. The first learning that we do, and let's focus on memory, is short-term memory. Now, short-term memory, it's chemically mediated. It's fast. I'll give you an example. Anybody here juggle? Ever try to juggle? I remember trying it and took about a day, but by the end of the day, I kind of felt like I had the hang of it, right? First with one hand and then incorporating 2 hands. I definitely didn't look like a professional in any way, right? But I thought, okay, I got it. And what happened when I went back the next day? That. So why? Why is that the learning that I thought I had down packed the first day didn't carry on to the second day? Well, because that initial learning that I did the day before was chemically mediated. That was short-term memory. Now, how else? What's the next step of learning? Well, long-term memory. Structurally, chemical changes happen between these synapses with the neurotransmitters, and as you continue to provide that chemical stimulus, we start to see structural changes in the brain. Let me prove this to you. Let's take an example here. Braille. So individuals that read Braille have large they have larger hand sensory areas in their brain. Larger. There's more volume. If you were to weigh it, there's larger areas of the brain. Why? Because their brains have undergone those chemical and structural changes that have fortified it. Remember the piano sequence, right? Let me give you another example. Anybody here left-handed? No? All right. My son is left-handed, so is my wife, right? And it's interesting that left-handed people are right brain dominant. And the area of their brains that writes with the left is more voluminous, it's more developed than ours, us right-handed people. I'll give you another example. Cabbies. There's a wonderful study that actually looked at the brains of cabbies in London. Now these gentlemen have to actually learn all the streets for them to pass their exams. Now, what do the scientists find? They found that the individuals who actually successfully passed their exams, the area of their brain was more developed than those that didn't. So somewhere in the back, there was some propensity probably, and they were probably those individuals that they rarely get lost. Unlike me, I'm always getting lost, right? But their brains have developed further. Now they study. They study day in, day out to learn that area. They are stimulating the brain. There's chemical changes, there's structural changes, and the brain develops. Okay, so again, and this is the visual spatial, right? So the London taxi cab drivers who have to memorize the map of London itself, they actually have larger brain regions related to visual spatial or mapping regions. This is your parietal lobe. Okay, so we have chemical short-term memory, and we have structural changes that bring about long-term memory. Right? Now, but these two, they interact. They interact with one another with repeated stimulus. So what's the third way that we learn? Functionally. Consider this a priming, right? As you use that brain region repeatedly, it becomes more easily excitable, right? And thus, it's easier to use again. Let me give you an example. Anybody here paint? Take an artist who always uses watercolors and give them pastels to use. I guarantee you they're going to make something beautiful out of it. Take someone who plays the trumpet and give them a slide trombone. I guarantee you it's easier. It's easier because I played both. I'll give you another example. Chemical, structural, now functional changes, right? So we have a brain that's chemically changed, structurally changed, and it's functionally primed. Remember when you learned to ride a bike for the first time? And gosh, we rode our bikes a lot when we were kids, right? And we probably had the scrapes and bruises. Oh, we had the scrapes and scars to prove it. And then years go by, and we never got on top of a bike again until one day, either a nephew, a niece, or a grandchild was on their bike, and you're just like, oh, let me see, and you get on top of that bike. Remember those first few seconds where you're kind of like wobbly? But within about 10 seconds, you're riding that bike as if you never stopped. Why is that? That happened because long ago, chemical and structural changes happen, functional changes happen. The brain is forever primed for that stimulus. Do you know it takes about 10,000 hours to master a musical instrument, right? But it's not that simple. Some people take more time, others take less. Hence, look, there's no one intervention that works for everyone. We're all different. We are all different. Back to your question, do our brains look differently? They probably do, but it's the way that those interconnections are made that are different. So what we discuss here today may not apply to everyone, but I can assure you, at least it does in part, hopefully more so, but remember that. This is not universally applicable, and in the fact that we will not all get the same exact results. So let's talk about the brain, the aging brain. Remember, neuroplasticity. Recall I mentioned that I was going to teach you how you could take your brain to the gym and exercise different areas of it. Follow me. Here are the 4 core neurocognitive domains. They used to be 6. Fortunately, we've been able to narrow them down to 4. These core neurocognitive domains are located in different areas of your brain, but remember, we're all wiring and we're all connected. So let's talk about memory. There's 3 types of memory. There's immediate, what we've just been talking about. There's short-term, what you had for breakfast this morning, and there's long-term memory. First time you ever got behind the wheel of a car. The first girl we ever kissed. The first house we ever moved into. Long-term memories. Now, the next core cognitive domain is your executive function. By the way, memory, a lot of this, especially the short-term consolidation to long-term, is in the hippocampus, temporal lobe, and that's in charge of memory, right? So going back to your question before that you said, okay, somebody has a stroke and it impairs an area of the brain that is in charge of memory, right? What then? I've had cases like that where I've been consulted to see an individual who had just suffered a stroke, and as I'm looking at the MRI, I was like, wow, look at that. It hit the hippocampus. And I knew when I went up to this gentleman that everything, almost everything would be fine, except the short-term memory was gone. Right? So it's clearly related, right? But there are compensatory tools, and that's where cognitive rehabilitation comes in, right? To use the areas that have not been knocked out, right? The entire hippocampus is not gone. There are areas of the hippocampus that are still viable, still active, and we can use those areas and fortify those areas. So getting back on track, executive function, frontal lobe of the brain, this is the powerhouse of the cell. This is the executive suite where all the attention, the concentration, the planning, the multitasking, the problem solving, judgment, reasoning, emotions are here in the frontal lobe. Next core cognitive domain is the visual spatial domain. This is the domain, this is the area in our brains that allow us to navigate, to orient ourselves. If I want to walk from here to that exit, I plan it, I map out my course. Turn off the lights, I'm still using my visual spatial domain, but now I'm also using my immediate memory. The fourth core neurocognitive domain is language. All the components of language, reading, writing, comprehension, speech and expression. Remember this, I will show this repeatedly. Yes?
But you don't have anything there for control of the body, the walking, the moving of the arms.
Motor functions.
Motor function.
Motor functions, cortex. Yeah. So these are neurocognitive domains, right? So this is leaving the motor, the actual motor cortex aside. Right? So let me give you an example. I'm a pictures guy, so I learn by pictures. A typical drive to work in New York. Has it ever happened to you that you leave home, and next thing you know, you're in front of the office, and you think to myself, like, gosh, I don't even remember driving here. Was it because you forgot? No. Is that you were off somewhere. You were in autopilot mode. Why? Because you've formed habit. It's more energy efficient for your brain to go into autopilot mode and for your daily drive to look like this. But a drive like this, are you stimulating the four core neurocognitive domains as best you could? No, because remember the word intentionality. Remember, if that individual had their hand on the table and they were thinking, I wonder what's for dinner today. No changes, right? So your drive can have no changes because it's habit, the power of habit. But what if your drive instead intentionally looked like this, right? So now that mundane, simple drive to work becomes a cognitive exercise where you can see that there are 3 lanes on your right, there are 2 lanes on the left, right? There's a bicycle on the left corner, you're on 10th Avenue. This could be every drive we make. Again, I hope I have time to give you a little bit of my background, but I've been in Naples about 4 years. When I came here, man, it was strict GPS. I would get lost all the time. After an unfortunate event that ended up becoming a blessing to me, I learned most of the streets in Naples. I don't use a GPS purposely, and I keep to that because I want to continuously stimulate, get those chemical changes, those structural changes, prime my brain. Look, let me give you an example. That drive, right? By the way, this is how Tesla works. That drive to work, are we exercising memory? Yes, right? We're using immediate, we're using short-term, we're using long-term memory to be able to navigate. Are we exercising executive function, that frontal lobe of our brains? I mean, look at this, planning, problem-solving, multitasking, attention, concentration, judgment, absolutely. Actually, driving is probably one of the most complex things that humans beings do. With driving, are we using visual spatial function, navigation? You bet. We are. Are we using language? Reading, writing? I hope so. Right? Remember here? There? One way? Recognition? Right? Yes. Now, depending on the activity that we do, we're going to stimulate the brain in a different strengths, right? Remember that analogy of going to the gym and doing curls just for biceps. Now, let me give you another example. Anybody here play chess? Yes. An amazing, cognitively engaging game, chess. And I'll show you why. Let's go back to this. Okay, so a game of chess, are we using immediate and short-term memory? Yes. How about long-term? That's where strategies are. Yes, we're using long-term. Are we using executive function here? Planning and problem solving, right? We most certainly are. Are we stimulating visual spatial function? Absolutely. The horse will only travel a certain way. The queen travels a certain way. The king, he's kind of lazy, I always thought, but yes, he also does. Your pawns, your bishops, visual spatial. How about language? Somebody went like, well, look, I'll tell you what. If you're playing against a computer, there's not a lot of language, right? There may be some foul language every once in a while on your part, but there's not. But what if you're playing with another person? Now you're sitting face to face from somebody else. Now, yes, you bet you're using language, and you're adding a social component to this. Look, social activity is brain food. So if you take a cognitively engaging exercise that we know is hitting memory, executive function, visual, spatial, and you sit in front of somebody, and now language is also involved. And depending on the topic of conversation, memory is going to be further pulled in, or you'll talk about your drive on the way there, or where you lived, when you were in New Jersey, in Morris County, and I was 25 minutes from the Lincoln Tunnel. It's further stimulation. Social activity is brain food. Remember that. Social activity is brain food. Okay, so people always ask me about web-based programs. I think we've probably all heard of Lumosity. Some of these are actually very good. CogniFit, CogHQ, CogMet. If you want to know my favorite, it's this one. I've done all three.
Which one?
This is my favorite, CogniFit. Look, when you do these, there will be some activities that you find challenging, and that's okay. There are others that you breeze through. You're saying, "Oh, are you kidding me?" But look, each activity is actually, you can map it out. Remember intentionality. So when you're given an activity, think to yourself, am I stimulating memory? Is this executive function? Is this visual spatial? Is this language? What exactly am I honing in on? So again, all three are good. My favorite is the first one. Now, we touched on socially engaging activity, brain food, right? Why is social activity brain food? Well, let me tell you something. Do you know that individuals who are quote-unquote hermits, who always like to be by themselves, don't like to interact with people? If they could, they would live in a log cabin in the woods, away from the rest of the world. Do you know that those individuals tend to develop cognitive impairments earlier than others? They do. Why? There's a reason for that. Social activity is brain food. You're stimulating the brain. So if you're socially deprived, you're also malnourished in that sense. I've seen this firsthand as a concierge physician. I have clients that come to my practice. I go to the hospital, but I also have clients, aka patients, who are in memory care. And every 6 weeks or so, I do a surprise visit, which is wonderful. You got to see everybody scramble. But I do those 6 week surprise visits, number one, to ensure that the level of care is maintained. And number two, I want to see how they're doing cognitively. And I will tell you that over the last year, thanks to COVID, I have seen a cognitive decline in my clients that are in memory care that has been faster and more rampant than ever before. Why is that? Social isolation, right? They're not interacting with one another because everybody's quarantined. The families aren't coming in because they're not able to. So they're missing that social engagement, right? The cognitively engaging activities that they would be in a room, participating in a game. That's missing. So we're starting to. I've been seeing a very, very rapid cognitive decline. It's unfathomable, right? But why? Getting back to the topic, socially engaging activity. Social activity is brain food. Look, our brains are stimulated when we interact. I'll give you an example. Check this out. Functional MRI. See how this functional MRI lights up? So this is actually it's a pretty cool study. Now, I hate reading, but follow with me. In our study, we used the brain imaging technique, functional MRI, to measure the responses of our participants to brief video clips. Now, these depicted two human figures, either interacting or not interacting with each other in the video. Now, intriguingly, a single brain region, PSTS, was the only part of the brain that could differentiate between an interactive process and a non-interactive, a person solo. Picture this as people watching. You ever people watch? You see people interacting with one another? Imagine that versus just watching one individual just walking. That's what this was. So that is the right PSTS was the only brain region that was reliably more activated by videos. This strongly implicates the important role that this region plays in perceiving interactive behavior. Whether it's a video or whether it's playing chess with another human being in front of you. Interactive behavior. Let's use an example. Let's go back to those 4 core neurocognitive domains. Take this image. Now let's take it to the gym, right? Memory. As these 3 ladies are laughing, they're talking about something, right? Something stimulating them. I guarantee you, there's some memory there, whether it's immediate, something that just one of them just did, or it's short term or it's long term, about what happened, what one of them did back in high school. Executive function, right? The problem solving, attention and concentration, following the stories, even if it's a joke or a storyline. Visual spatial, navigating. Yeah, well, they're walking through the woods while they're talking. Not as strong, right? Language, you bet. So I'd say probably in this situation, what if you could put number 1, first, second, third, and fourth domains being activated, how would you guys orient this? Like, which core cognitive domain do you suppose is being activated the most there? I heard language and memory, absolutely. Language and memory, right? So probably, well, by the laughs, language, right? I bet you she told the joke, right? So language, memory, right? Not so much visual, spatial, and executive function, right? And that's the importance of intentionality. Back to that word intentionality. When you go to the gym and you want to exercise just the biceps, you do just curls, right? Here, this cognitive exercise, socially engaging activity, is stimulating different areas of the brain, some more than others, right? Let's use an example, crossword puzzles, right? We've all been told, do crossword puzzles every day. It'll keep your brain sharp. Okay, let's put a crossword puzzle right here in the middle. Based on what we've just talked about, with a crossword puzzle, are we using memory? Yes, we are. Are we using executive function? Yes, right? How about visual spatial? Right? Vertical, horizontal axes, right? What the words? Language, oh, you bet. So let's do that again. With crossword puzzles, rate in the order of stimulation, which one would go first and second and third and fourth? There's probably no wrong answer to this, but I think we can agree on a trend. Crossword puzzle. Beautiful. That's what I would say too. Language, memory, visual, spatial, executive. So if you know what a crossword puzzle is giving you, yet you want to stimulate your executive function more, crossword puzzle is not going to do that. Continue the crossword puzzle, but look for something else. What can give me that attention, the concentration, the problem solving, the multitasking? Chess was highly pulling from executive function. Something we most of us can relate to. Golf. Now, what do we know about golf? Socially engaging, right? Definitely. But when you are out on the course and you're playing golf, what are you stimulating? Frustration. Frustration. I'm sorry. So, with golf, are you using memory? Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Remember where strategies are, right? Are you using executive function? You bet. Are you using visual spatial? Yes. Are you using language? Probably most of it we don't want to repeat right here, right? But yes. So do you see how golf is cognitively engaging activity? It is good for your brain. It's also socially engaging, and it's physically engaging, and we're going to get to that. So 3 gems of a healthy aging brain: cognitively engaging activity, socially engaging activity, right? And physically engaging activity. And we're going to get to the physical part next. Again, Anybody here like cards? Blackjack, poker, bridge, mahjong? Okay, good, good. So when you're playing cards, again, go back to this gym, right? With cards, rate the order. How would you rate the order of you and your friends playing bridge or mahjong?
Mahjong, well, last night we played Mahjong for the first time as a group again. So it was like months since we've been
must have been-
together. And it was like a bunch of wild women, let me tell you that. I think we've used everything. But the first thing we did, of course, was all how nice it was to see each other. So that was, it started off very happy and visual, you know, because we're noticing each other and how we've changed over the last several months, if we did. And so I would say that would, for women, that would be the first thing, because that we all commented, oh, you look wonderful, you look fine, or you let your hair go gray. Because a lot of women did, they took that opportunity to do that. So it's a very different aspect for women playing Mahjong. And then we sat down and got down to playing, and then you go with your long-term memory, because you're thinking of how you used to play the game. And we had been playing online against strangers. So this was, long-term memory coming back, and problem solving, because you have to solve the name of the game. And word finding, well, you're not finding words, but you're trying to comprehend what the person across from you is using and gathering in tiles to make her game go out.
Yes. And comprehension, right? You're playing with other people.
Yeah.
Visual, spatial?
Yes. Yeah, because you're visually trying to construct what they're gathering in tiles as they pick them off the table.
Good, good. And using short term.
When the tiles come out and they have a chance to either take it or pass, and you're watching what they're picking up and saying,
Okay. So if you were to rate level of intensity, first place, second place, third place, fourth place, how would you do it for your game yesterday?
I would say the first in yesterday's episode was long-term memory, because
Okay.
believe it or
So that's
not,
number one.
a lot of us forgot how we started, once we got the board ready. It's like, do we go to the left, did we go to the right?
Okay. And what's number two?
And then
So number
two,
one you said was memory.
memory, yeah, and number two would be concentration, executive function. Because we're trying to concentrate and recall how we did these things. And then the visual perception, it kind of like ties with that, in with the executive function.
Okay.
'Cause you're problem
Which one would be,
solving and
yeah.
you're visually trying to
Okay.
watch what
And
they're
between visual, spatial, and language, which one received a stronger stimulus?
I would say the visual spatial got more attention than comprehension, and reading and word finding and speech, because you don't talk that much.
Okay, good, good. So this is how I want you to approach activities, right? Whether it's driving, whether it's playing chess, whether it's playing golf, whether it's playing an instrument, whether it's doing a crossword puzzle. Everything needs to go back to this because of intentionality. Learning that 5-fingered piano sequence. Remember, it didn't matter if you were playing on a real piano keyboard or if you had your hand on the table, as long as you were focused on what you were doing. Okay, so physically engaging activity, otherwise known as exercise, right? So why is exercise good for you? Stimulates your brain. What else? Circulation, good. Why else is exercise good for you?
Just makes you feel good.
makes you feel good. Endorphins, right? Your feel-good hormones. What else? Why else is exercise good for you?
Opens up your arteries.
Opens up your arteries. Good for your heart. Good for stronger heart. Yes, good. All correct answers. And I've asked this question before, and these are some of the most common ones I hear. It's good for your heart, circulates more blood to your brain, you release endorphins, the feel-good hormones, keeps my joints moving, helps me to stay active, keeps me socially involved with my golf buddies, and helps me to relax. All correct answers. But why is physical activity, and I mean motion, so why else is it good for you? Like on a physiological basis, right? Because all these responses are correct, by the way. But let's talk about your immune system. Why is your immune system and your body so linked? They really are. Your immune system and movement. You ever see a bunch of kids sitting at the edge of a bench? How long, if you were to time it, do you think it would take for one of them to start kicking his feet? Honestly, yeah, exactly. Within a matter of seconds, they are all kicking their feet. And what do we do as grown-up adults? Stop kicking your feet. No. Don't ever do that. That's evolution. Kicking their feet is evolution, and I'll prove to you why. Because look, here's your lymphatic system. Now look, your immune system uses your lymphatic system almost like a railway. And in that lymphatic system, there's a clear liquid called lymph. Lymph carries all your white blood cells in it, the soldiers of your immune system. Now, your lymphatic system, you see here, like, it doesn't have the luxury of a circulatory system. Heart, arteries, veins. It's a closed circuit with a pump behind it. Right? So it's a pressure gradient. That's how our heart, arteries, and veins work. Now, the lymphatic system, in part, has the effect of the heart behind it, but there are parts of the lymphatic system that are open. They are open circuits. They are not closed. So that pressure gradient doesn't exist there. So how do we get lymphatic fluid from here that needs to circulate? How do we get it throughout the rest of the body? The answer is right here. The extrinsic compression of lymphatic vessels via external tissue forces, the contractions of skeletal muscles. So what does this mean? It means that every time you walk, it doesn't have to be a sprint, every time you walk, your muscles are contracting. And as your muscles contract, your lymphatic fluid is being swooshed around. And it's circulating throughout your body, carrying those white blood cells, the soldiers of your immune system, throughout your body. Why do you think kids are so darn healthy? Really, it's like they're made of rubber. They get sick, boom, they bounce back, right? Whereas me, I see a sick kid and I run the opposite direction. But it's because kids are always in movement. Right? They're electric. If I could bottle my kids' energy and sell it, I'd be a multimillionaire overnight. Right? But kids are in movement. That's why kids are healthy. That's why we need to be in movement. Let me give you another example, right? Exercise immunology. It's very, look it up. Exercise immunology. It's a field in and of itself, and it's revealing. Let me show you something. So we have a gentleman, very well-fit gentleman. He's doing exercise. And what do we know about exercise and the immune system? Here, let me show you. A single bout of exercise has a profound effect on the total number and composition of your circulating leukocytes, your white blood cells. After dynamic exercise, in other words, within minutes, your total leukocyte count increases by 2 to 3-fold. Isn't that amazing? Now look at this. Prolonged exercise, 30 minutes or more, instead of 2 to 3-fold, now we're talking 5-fold. Now do you see why kids are so healthy? They're always in movement. Their leukocyte counts are always 3 to 5-fold up. And that's why we need to be in movement, right? Now look at the bottom here, exercise-induced leukocytosis, or elevation in white blood cells. They decrease, right? They decrease back within 6 to 24 to 30 hours back to your levels that you were beforehand. Why is this important? Well, it's important to make activity regular, right? Every day you go for that 30-minute walk, right? Every day you play golf. Every day you ride your bicycle, right? Regular. Over the last year, we've heard a lot about interleukin-6, cytokine. Have you guys heard the term cytokine cascade? Or probably one of the most terrible things about COVID-19 is the inflammation that comes with active infection. It is a system-wide inflammation, not just in the lungs. It's a cytokine storm is the term that's been coined. A cytokine cascade. Now, cytokines are inflammatory markers in your body. They communicate. Now, what do we know? One in particular, and it's come up repeatedly in journals and in the news occasionally, interleukin-6. Now, interleukin-6 it's pro-inflammatory. Actually, individuals who have active coronavirus, their levels are sky high of interleukin-6. It's actually a prognostic marker. The higher the interleukin-6, the more likely these individuals were to end up in the ICU intubated. Now, sorry? I thought I was there. So interleukin-6, but now here's the interesting piece though. In the early 2000s, we found out that not all interleukin-6 is pro-inflammatory, because there's one area of the body that we know where interleukin-6, right here, produced in muscle by contracting skeletal muscle, it's actually anti-inflammatory. Let me show you. Okay, why is this? We'll get back to that. So here's the thing. Interleukin-6, inflammation, right? The cytokine storm, cytokine cascade. And this is just a mechanism. I'm going to stay away from medical jargon, I promise you. But interleukin-6 has two functions. One is pro-inflammatory. But if that interleukin-6 is released from the muscle, that interleukin-6 is anti-inflammatory. Why is this important? It's important because of this, right? The term inflammation, look, aging in part is linked with chronic inflammation. Let me give you an example. Our bodies change as we age, right? Right now, does anybody have any joint pain anywhere? My lower back hurts, I'll be honest with you. Right? My hand hurts. Why is that? Ask those kids sitting on that bench if any of them have joint pains. They don't. Yeah, they won't even know what joint is. So there's something about aging that causes an elevation in leukocytes, and we can actually measure those. And so aging has, in part, attributed to it a process of chronic inflammation, and that's okay. Because what can we do about it? Well, one of the options that we have is movement, right? Physical activity and exercise, because we produce interleukin-6 from our muscles that are anti-inflammatory. Life is movement. Life is motion. What is the difference between you and I and a rock? A rock's not alive. It doesn't move, right? But we do. So, the role of interleukin-6, in summary, it's all relative. Depending on where the interleukin-6, an inflammatory or anti-inflammatory cytokine, depending on where it's produced, it's going to have a different function. We want this one. We want the refreshing anti-inflammatory. This comes from moderate physical activity. Now, I want to share with you guys this image. This was in Foz do Iguaçu, Argentina. Beautiful, enormous waterfalls that divide Brazil and Argentina. And I had the privilege of going there with one of my older brothers, and we took a road trip, and we saw the waterfalls, which are a hell of a lot bigger than this, from the Brazil and Argentina side. The Argentina side is prettier, may I say. But I went to this waterfall. It's a small waterfall, and you know what I did? I sat right here, right there. And as I sat down on under these waters, God, they were so clean. I looked straight up. I got drenched, and I never loved getting drenched so much. It was almost like getting stuck in a rainstorm when you're a kid. And I looked up, I opened my mouth, and I drank from this water because I knew it was clean. It was refreshing. It came from spring, right? Now, why is that water clean? It's clean because it's always in movement, right? Now, take this, suddenly build a dam up top, and just wait. Give it some time, and it's going to eventually look like that. You don't want to drink from this. You sure as heck don't want to bathe in it. So, how are we any different? Look at this. We're up to 60% water, up to 60% water, right? We're water. Look at that. Look, your brain and your heart, 73% water. Your lungs, 83%. Your skin, 84%. Your kidneys and your muscles, 79%. Look, even your bones are 31% water, right? We are water, right? Bruce Lee said, "Be water, my friend." I wish he knew the significance of that. So this is what we want to be like. We want to be in movement. This is the beauty of physical activity. Now, we talked about cognitively engaging activity. We spoke about socially engaging activity. And we just talked about physically engaging activity. And I give you several reasons why exercise is good for you. Let's talk a little bit about nutrition, right? Because I cannot just overlook that. So we know that there are certain nutrients and vitamins that are good for us, essential vitamins that we need to obtain from nutrition because our bodies don't produce them. When it comes to cognitive enhancement and maintaining healthy brain function, there are some that stand out. And there are studies to back these up. Let me give you an example. Turmeric, right? We often hear about turmeric, which is the spice that gives Indian food its flavor, really. There's a component inside turmeric called curcumin. curcumin, curcumin. Now, curcumin was used in a very good study at UCLA that they took individuals who had subjective memory changes. Everybody underwent neurocognitive testing before and after the trial. They split the group into two, and it was a randomized placebo-controlled double-blind trial, which is pretty darn good. And the individuals that received, I think it was 90 milligrams of curcumin a day, and the others who received the placebo, at the end of the study, when they did neurocognitive testing again, the individuals that had been receiving the curcumin, which was monitored through blood levels daily, they actually performed better on tests, particularly in response to memory. Look, antioxidants, vitamin D, vitamin B12, vitamin E, wine. I have a presentation just on wine and the data behind it. Why 1 to 2 glasses of wine is actually good for your brain. Now, look, if you don't drink, please don't start now just because Dr. Bandera said I should. Please don't. Okay, but if you do, and you do it moderately, conservatively, enjoy it. Don't feel bad. Okay? When it comes to diets, I don't have time for it today, but the Mediterranean diet is probably the best diet that you can have relative to your brain. The best. The last piece I want to talk to you about, because this is directly related to cognitive health, is sleep. The importance of sleep. Remember I talked about Aiden and the fact that he's frequently in REM. He switches back and forth. And it's not just the REM sleep, but the non-REM sleep that's important. Look at this. Slow wave sleep, which is deep sleep, otherwise known as the non-REM, what do we know about it? It's important for memory consolidations. Sometimes it's been referred to as sleep-dependent memory processing. Take an individual who's sleep deprived for whatever reason. Ask them how their memory feels. Yes, and we've all been there. If I'm tired, I'm stressed out, I'm sleep deprived, my memory is not optimal, I'll tell you that. Far from it, right? So the importance of sleep. Look, impaired memory consolidation has been seen in individuals with primary insomnia who thus do not perform as well as those who are healthy in memory tasks following a period of sleep. That refreshing feeling you get after a good night's rest, you perform better the next day, right? Okay. So let's go in reverse for one moment here, because that was the last slide of the presentation. So follow me now, okay? Here we go. You guys ready? We're going to do this in about 2 minutes. We've been talking about neuroplasticity, how the brain rewires, restructures itself, and that process never stops. So what can we do to enhance that process, to use that process to our benefit? Number one, sleep. The importance of sleep, both REM and non-REM, for memory consolidation. We talked about nutrition. There are certain minerals and vitamins that are essential, that we need to obtain from our dietary sources, because we know that there are particular antioxidants, vitamins, minerals that are positive for brain functioning. By the way, we really are what we eat. We talked about water, right? We are mostly water. And the reason I started to talk to you about water is because it's movement, right? The importance of movement. And I gave you the example of the waterfall, right? This is what we want to be like. We talked about another benefit of exercise, right? We talked about interleukin-6, and that not all interleukin-6 is bad. The one that's produced from contracting skeletal muscle is good because it's anti-inflammatory. We also talked about inflammaging, right? Chronic inflammation as a part of aging. But we also talked about what we can do about it. Interleukin-6, we touched on that. We talked about exercise immunology. What happens when we exercise? 3 to 5-fold, depending on our activity. It goes back down after 6 to 24 hours, so hence the importance of getting into that exercise routine. We talked further about why exercise and physical activity is important for the immune system. It's important because your lymphatic system parts of it requires skeletal muscle contraction to swoosh that lymphatic fluid around. We talked about kids. Never tell them to stop kicking their feet. Actually, we should learn from them, because that's evolution right there. We talked about exercise, right? And we talked about now the 3 gems: socially engaging, physically engaging, and cognitively engaging activity. And we talked about how to take your brain to the gym and the importance of intentionality, right? Focusing and determining exactly what it is that you are fortifying. Why? So you can choose different activities that will stimulate those areas of the brain. And I gave you several examples. We talked about the web-based tools that we can use, and then we also talked about the cognitively engaging activity, and we used the example of chess playing, and how depending on the activity that we choose, we're going to stimulate different areas of our domains. Driving, right? Perfect. The 3 gems. I talked about the 2006 study from Harvard that really was groundbreaking, laid the foundation for neuroplasticity. We talked about the changes that go on in the brain as we learn something. Chemically, short-term. Structurally, long-term. Until we're finally functionally changing and we're priming our brains. Functionally, we talked about how long-term and short-term interact. We gave examples. Structural, long-term. Me and my juggling, chemical changes, and then I showed you some beautiful images of the brain that help to understand why one area of the brain can recruit neuronal activities from around it to fortify itself. How the brain is always active, it's never paused, there is no out of order. Debunked. Show you some cute pictures of Aiden. We talked about those neuronal pathways and creating bypasses to the neuronal pathways and how we go about that. More beautiful images of our brain. I remember the first time I saw one of these images, I've never been able to think of a brain the same way. Structural, functional, diffusion MRI, right? The benefits to each one of them. We talked about the famous Harvard study, the electrical activity of the brain, and we are back to that first time we ever saw a structural image of our brain. Perfect. Now, I'd like to thank you all for being here. Thank you for participating. I love a crowd that participates, and if you have any questions, I'm all ears. I want to set aside the last of this presentation for you, for any questions that you have for me. We're good? All right, great. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. Thank you. Great. Great. By the way, sorry to interrupt you guys. Right here, I'm gonna leave this for you guys. This is, if you want to sign up for our newsletter, we have a newsletter that we send to our clients, and it's been very informative. Everything from COVID to neuroplasticity to everyday useful information, we send it out. We will not share your email with anyone else. Okay, and I'll leave this here for whoever wants to put their names on it. I'll get a pen for you guys. You do? You want to put this here?
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you for your time.
You know, I started yoga about 8 years ago, and I already walked like 2 to 5 miles every day, and I feel so good. I'm 78, and